January 1944. A bitter wind cut across the open plains of northern Italy. Mud clung to the boots of exhausted infantry, and the horizon shimmered with smoke from distant artillery. In the dim light, rows of steel lay partially buried in the frozen earth. American M4 Sherman tanks, their green paint dulled by grime, were massed like a silent mechanical army. The German soldiers observing them through binoculars did not flinch at the men. They feared the machines. These were the weapons their generals had called impossible, fast, reliable, and armed with firepower that could punch through concrete and armor alike. By late morning, American engineers began clearing fields and laying supply routes, each movement deliberate, precise. The Germans, entrenched along ridgelines, adjusted their positions, calculating angles and weaknesses, yet there was unease. This was not the first tank they had faced, but it moved differently, struck differently, and seemed to shrug off the weapons that had destroyed so many of their own. Somewhere behind the lines, Allied commanders tracked the German reactions with grim satisfaction. The battlefield was set. What came next would reshape strategies, force retreats, and turn the war in ways few anticipated. The stage was ready for the weapon that Germany would later capture in overwhelming numbers and discard. By early 1944, the war in Europe had entered a decisive phase. The Allies were pressing from multiple fronts, testing Axis defences across Italy, France, and the Low Countries. The Italian campaign, stretching from the beaches of Salerno to the mountainous ridges of Monte Cassino, had slowed progress, but it revealed one undeniable fact: the German army remained a disciplined, adaptive force, capable of using terrain and fortification to deadly effect. Each advance required careful planning, artillery preparation, and coordination with armor and air support. The American forces had been reinforced with a surge of mechanized units, a combination of newly trained infantry and armored divisions equipped with the latest tanks and support vehicles. Among them, the M4 Sherman was the centerpiece, a tank designed not just for brute force, but for adaptability. Its 75mm main gun could engage fortified positions, while its suspension allowed it to traverse uneven ground faster than any medium tank fielded by the Axis powers. American doctrine emphasized speed, combined arms coordination, and maintenance logistics, allowing the Sherman to operate continuously where older German designs often faltered. For the Germans, the appearance of these vehicles represented both a tactical and psychological challenge. Reports from the front lines described American armor advancing with a fluidity that German engineers had not anticipated. Early intelligence assessments labeled the Sherman as impossible, a weapon whose combination of speed, firepower, and durability exceeded expectations based on battlefield encounters in North Africa and Sicily. These assessments were circulated to panzer commanders, who began adjusting deployment strategies to counter what they still believed could be contained with careful positioning and concentrated fire. Behind the front lines, the logistical implications were immense. The US Army had perfected an armored supply chain, ensuring fuel, ammunition, and spare parts reached units within hours of engagement. Maintenance crews worked under combat conditions, repairing tracks and engines, often in full view of enemy observers. German commanders recognized that any engagement with the Sherman could not simply rely on numerical advantage. It required foresight, precision, and a willingness to commit artillery and anti-tank assets in coordinated strikes. The terrain of northern Italy amplified these challenges. Hills, river valleys, and narrow passes favored defenders, yet also created bottlenecks where mobile armored units could dominate. In early January, reconnaissance missions reported that American units were experimenting with combined arms tactics, coordinating infantry, artillery, and armor in ways that minimized exposure while maximizing impact. German forces responded with ambushes, minefields, and improvised defenses, but the sheer number of Shermans moving into position began to erode confidence. Beyond Italy, the Sherman had already seen action in Normandy, Sicily, and the deserts of North Africa. Each encounter demonstrated the tank's resilience against standard Panzer IVs and Stugs. Crews reported that the Sherman's sloped armor deflected shots that would have penetrated earlier models, and its mobility allowed rapid redeployment under fire. German propaganda initially dismissed these reports, emphasizing losses inflicted by the Luftwaffe and artillery. But field reports told a different story. American armor was surviving, advancing, and dominating engagements in ways previously thought improbable. By the end of January 1944, Allied planners were preparing for a concentrated armored offensive. The Sherman units, supported by artillery and infantry, were poised to exploit weaknesses in the German defensive lines. Meanwhile, German commanders debated whether to concentrate tanks for counterattacks or rely on static defenses reinforced by engineers and anti-tank crews. The coming weeks would test doctrines, reveal operational limitations, and set the stage for the mass captures of equipment that would later become a symbol of technological overmatch and strategic mismanagement. The stage was set. Terrain, weather, and logistical preparation aligned to create the conditions in which the impossible American weapon would make its mark, compelling both awe and miscalculation on the German side. By February 1944, the American armored presence in Italy had solidified. Divisions equipped with the M4, Sherman began moving into position along the Gustav Line, a network of German fortifications stretching from the Tyrrhenian coast to the Adriatic. The line was formidable, reinforced bunkers, anti-tank obstacles, and minefields designed to channel attackers into kill zones. German intelligence noted the arrival of American armor with concern. Reports emphasized that the Shermans, though individually less heavily armored than the Tiger or Panther, were superior in mobility, reliability, and maintainability, qualities that allowed them to be deployed in overwhelming numbers. The M4 Sherman's design was rooted in practical mass production and battlefield survivability. Its high-velocity 75mm gun could penetrate standard German armor at moderate ranges, while the 105mm variant provided direct support against bunkers and infantry positions. Internally, the tank was engineered for rapid repair. Interchangeable parts, accessible engines, and a standardized track system meant that a disabled vehicle could often be returned to combat within hours. German engineers initially underestimated this capability, assuming that American tanks would succumb to repeated artillery strikes or mechanical failure. The battlefield reality proved otherwise. Allied operational planning leveraged these advantages. Reconnaissance units identified weak points in German defenses, while infantry coordinated with armor to exploit them. Engineers cleared obstacles and laid bridges, allowing Sherman units to bypass natural and man-made barriers. Artillery units followed the advance, softening key positions without requiring direct engagement. The cumulative effect was a continuous fluid offensive that German commanders struggled to anticipate. German troops observed the Sherman's movements with growing alarm. Field reports describe an almost mechanical efficiency, tanks advancing in synchronized formations, supporting infantry, and quickly exploiting gaps in defenses. The combination of speed, firepower, and mechanical reliability challenged the traditional German emphasis on positional warfare. Officers noted that standard ambush tactics were less effective. The Shermans could absorb hits, maneuver around obstacles, and continue the advance. Morale played a role as well. German infantry, conditioned to respect armored superiority, found the Americans' approach disconcerting. Units that had previously resisted panzer divisions found themselves confronted by vehicles that could endure punishment and return fire effectively. Psychological pressure mounted alongside the physical threat. For many German soldiers, the Sherman represented a new category of adversary, resilient, ubiquitous, and operationally flexible. By March 1944, engagements along the Liri Valley and near Cassino demonstrated the strategic implications of the Sherman's presence. German counterattacks were frequently repelled, and positions that had withstood previous assaults fell under sustained pressure. Captured Shermans began to accumulate behind German lines. While these were often evaluated for intelligence purposes, logistical constraints and the difficulty of integrating foreign technology meant that many were eventually abandoned or destroyed. This pattern would repeat across multiple theaters, leaving tens of thousands of these tanks in German custody, yet seldom repurposed effectively. The confluence of operational planning, mechanical reliability, and tactical innovation made the M4 Sherman a central factor in the Italian campaign. It redefined expectations for armored warfare, challenged established doctrines, and forced German commanders to rethink force allocation. These developments did not go unnoticed in Berlin, where High Command debated both the threat posed by American mass production and the failures in capturing strategic advantage from seized equipment. The groundwork was laid for the full confrontation, Sherman units poised to break German lines, German forces forced into reactive measures, and the looming reality that tens of thousands of captured American tanks would ultimately be discarded rather than exploited. This operational context set the stage for examining the Sherman through multiple perspectives, human, technological, tactical, and moral, that would define the next phase of the narrative. The soldiers who operated the Sherman were acutely aware of the tank's dual role, protector and weapon. Crews were trained not only to maneuver, but to maintain the vehicle under fire, often in freezing temperatures or under the threat of artillery. The commander, gunner, driver, and loader each had responsibilities that demanded precision and coordination. Infantrymen accompanying the tanks relied on this efficiency. Their survival often depended on the Sherman's ability to absorb hits and suppress enemy positions. Diaries and letters from tank crews describe a constant tension, exhilaration at the vehicle's performance, tempered by awareness that a single anti-tank round could disable them instantly. German infantry faced a different psychological burden. The Sherman, smaller and less imposing on paper than a Tiger, struck with unexpected effectiveness. Its speed and resilience undermined confidence in entrenched positions. Accounts from the front lines reveal a mix of respect and dread. Soldiers marveled at the Sherman's ability to cross terrain previously considered impassable, and to return from engagements seemingly unscathed. This human response influenced operational decisions, with German commanders cautious to commit units against what they now perceived as an unpredictable force. Tactically, the Sherman was a departure from earlier Allied armored doctrine. It emphasized mobility and combined arms coordination rather than raw armor or firepower superiority. Sherman units were deployed in carefully planned formations that allowed mutual support. Reconnaissance elements identified German positions in advance, artillery softened defenses, and infantry provided protection against anti-tank teams. The result was a fluid offensive capability. Sherman units could exploit gaps rapidly, circumventing strong points instead of engaging them head-on. German tactical responses initially relied on traditional defensive measures, fortified positions, anti-tank guns, and ambushes. While these remained effective in isolated cases, they could not neutralize the systemic advantages the Shermans brought. Mobility allowed the Americans to maintain momentum. Losses were quickly replaced with repaired or spare vehicles. Commanders learned that defensive doctrine had to be flexible, yet the speed of the American armored advance often outpaced the German capacity to adapt. Technologically, the Sherman embodied a balance between mass production and battlefield functionality. Its sloped armor increased effective protection against standard panzer rounds, while its suspension system allowed it to navigate rough terrain efficiently. Unlike many German tanks, it prioritized mechanical reliability over extreme armor or high-velocity guns, ensuring that the vehicle remained operational under extended conditions. Maintenance crews could replace tracks, repair engines, and restore combat readiness far faster than their German counterparts could recover damaged vehicles. German engineers studied the Sherman extensively. Intelligence reports noted its advantages: mechanical simplicity, fuel efficiency, and ease of repair. Yet, when tens of thousands of captured Shermans accumulated, the Wehrmacht lacked the infrastructure and compatible logistics to exploit them effectively. The technology was understood but could not be operationalized on a large scale. This disconnect highlighted a broader strategic lesson. Technical superiority requires integrated logistical and tactical systems to be effective. Allied commanders recognized the Sherman not merely as a tool, but as a force multiplier. Division leaders orchestrated offensives that combined armor, infantry, and artillery in precise sequences. Decisions were based on reconnaissance, terrain analysis, and intelligence about German dispositions. Leaders emphasized flexibility. Sherman units were rotated, repaired, and redeployed to exploit weak points. Commanders like Major General Jeffrey Keyes and others in the Italian campaign understood that leadership meant aligning human capability with the mechanical advantage of the Sherman, creating an operational rhythm that the Germans struggled to disrupt. On the German side, leadership faced frustration. Panzer and infantry commanders had to integrate captured Shermans into defensive planning, yet lacked both training and compatible logistics. Strategic debates in Berlin highlighted this gap. Officers recognized the tank's potential, but could not resolve the systemic limitations that prevented their deployment. This leadership failure compounded battlefield pressures. forcing reactive strategies rather than proactive countermeasures. From the German perspective, the Sherman was a paradox. Individually inferior to a tiger in armor and firepower, it posed a strategic threat due to numbers, reliability, and maneuverability. Field reports emphasized how Shermans could absorb hits, maintain formation, and continue advancing even under heavy fire. Anti-tank crews were forced to concentrate fire or risk being bypassed entirely. The psychological impact was significant. The Americans' use of Sherman formations created an impression of inevitability on the battlefield, undermining morale even before direct engagement. Captured Shermans were evaluated for intelligence purposes. German technical officers documented armor thickness, gun performance, and mechanical reliability. Yet, the inability to produce compatible ammunition, train crews, or integrate the vehicles into operational units meant that these impossible tanks were often left in depots, abandoned, or scrapped. The enemy recognized the technological advantage, but operational reality rendered it unusable, an irony that would become emblematic of mismanagement in late-war German logistics. The Sherman's effectiveness carried moral implications for both sides. For American crews, reliance on mechanical durability fostered confidence, yet also a latent awareness of risk. Letters from soldiers describe a bond with the vehicle, a mix of respect and dependence, while also acknowledging casualties among crews when the armor was insufficient against heavier German guns. For German forces, the Sherman symbolized the limits of positional warfare. Soldiers faced the tension of being outmaneuvered repeatedly by a weapon they could not fully counter. Commanders had to make ethical and tactical decisions about committing men to near-certain losses against superior mobility, weighing the preservation of life against strategic necessity. The presence of tens of thousands of captured Shermans further emphasized the moral and strategic absurdity. The enemy possessed the very tools they could not use effectively, while their own men continued to face attrition. The combined effect of human experience, tactical innovation, technological advantage, leadership decisions, and enemy perception set the stage for confrontation. Sherman units, optimized through doctrine and discipline, advanced toward key positions along the Gustav Line. German forces prepared for engagement, aware of the Sherman's capabilities yet constrained by logistical and operational limitations. The moment when these forces clashed, decisively and with lasting consequences, would define the next chapter of the campaign. March 15, 1944. The Leary Valley was shrouded in morning mist, the cold seeping through the boots and uniforms of soldiers on both sides. American Sherman tanks moved into position, engines low in the valley, treads grinding over frozen earth. Infantry followed in staggered formations, rifles ready, grenades in hand, while artillery crews opened with measured barrages designed to soften German strongpoints without exposing the tanks to unnecessary risk. The German defenses were formidable. Bunkers crowned the ridges, interspersed with anti-tank guns hidden behind rubble and natural cover. Mines were laid along expected approaches, and machine gun nests created overlapping fields of fire. Panzer Ives and remnants of older tanks were deployed for counterattacks. The Germans understood the Sherman's weaknesses, thinner armor and standard caliber guns, but they underestimated its mobility and coordination. The first contact came at 9:32. Shermans emerged from cover, advancing in a coordinated wedge. German artillery opened fire, shells ricocheting off sloped armor, damaging some tracks but failing to stop the advance. Infantry supporting the tanks neutralized anti-tank teams with suppressive fire, and engineers cleared mines under the tanks' protection. The Americans pushed forward with relentless rhythm, exploiting gaps created by previous bombardments and reconnaissance. By midday, German units attempted concentrated counterattacks. A small formation of Panzer V's moved to cut off the advancing Shermans, but American crews anticipated this maneuver. Sherman gunners targeted flanks, and artillery units disrupted supporting infantry. Tanks maneuvered to maintain interlocking fields of fire, each unit covering the other. The German attack faltered, forced into retreat by precision and numerical coordination rather than sheer firepower. As the valley opened, American forces exploited the terrain with methodical efficiency. Hills once thought impassable became avenues for armored movement. Reconnaissance reports guided the Shermans to weak points in defensive lines. German commanders issued orders to fall back to secondary positions. But the timing was too late. Shermans had already established footholds in strategic locations. cutting supply lines and isolating strongpoints. By late afternoon, casualties mounted on both sides. German infantry, exhausted and demoralized, withdrew under covering fire. The Shermans, despite damage sustained in the advance, remained operational due to rapid field repairs and interchangeable parts. The combined arms strategy, the synchronization of infantry armor and artillery, proved decisive. American forces captured multiple German positions, paving the way for further advances along the Gustav Line. The battlefield revealed the full paradox of the Sherman. Individually, it was outmatched in armor against heavier German tanks, yet its numbers, coordination, and mobility rendered this disadvantage moot. The Germans, confronted with sustained pressure from multiple directions, could not exploit their individual technological superiority. By evening, reports indicated that several dozen Shermans had been captured by German forces in scattered engagements, but the inability to repair or deploy them quickly meant these tanks were effectively removed from the fight, an ironic echo of the strategic misalignment that would define later captures on a larger scale. The Leary Valley engagement demonstrated the decisive effect of doctrine and preparation. The Sherman, integrated into an operational system designed for sustained offensive action, reshaped the battlefield. German forces were forced into reactive positions. Commanders confronted the limitations of entrenched strategies, and the momentum shifted toward the Allies in a way that would have long-term implications for the Italian campaign. This was not the end. The initial breakthroughs set the conditions for deeper incursions, larger captures of equipment, and the eventual culmination of American armored dominance in the theater. The tension, the tactical mastery, and the operational efficiency of the Sherman would reach their apex in the following weeks, solidifying both the weapon's reputation and its complex legacy in German hands. Late March 1944. The Allied advance pressed toward Cassino, the Gustav Line's linchpin. Sherman tanks spearheaded the offensive, their engines a steady drone beneath the roar of artillery and the rattle of machine guns. Reconnaissance units scouted German positions along ridgelines and river crossings, transmitting coordinates for concentrated strikes. The Germans, aware of the Sherman's approach, reinforced positions with mines, barbed wire, and Panther tanks positioned to dominate open approaches. On March 21st, the first major engagement erupted near the town of Sant'Angelo. American tanks advanced in a tight echelon, infantry at their flanks, while engineers cleared paths through obstacles. German artillery fired in coordinated barrages, attempting to halt the armored momentum. Shells struck armor plates, sometimes igniting fires, but the Sherman's design allowed rapid crew response and continued movement. Smoke, dust, and explosions reduced visibility, yet American units maintained formation and communication, pressing forward despite chaos. By mid-afternoon, German counterattacks attempted to isolate Sherman units. Panzer I-4s and anti-tank teams moved to flank, while Tiger tanks targeted lead vehicles. Shermans responded with coordinated fire, interlocking fields neutralizing approaching threats. Crews adjusted positioning dynamically, using the terrain for cover while maintaining offensive pressure. The Germans, facing unexpected resilience, were forced into piecemeal assaults rather than cohesive maneuvers, diminishing their effectiveness. At 15:47, a concentrated push breached the German outer line. Sherman units penetrated trenches and bunkers, infantry following to secure positions. German defenders retreated to secondary fortifications, abandoning supplies and equipment, including several captured Shermans. These captured vehicles, though numerous, could not be immediately utilized due to a lack of trained crews, compatible ammunition, and repair infrastructure. Tens of thousands of Shermans would later fall into German hands, yet strategic mismanagement rendered them largely inert. The operational tempo remained relentless. American forces exploited gaps, moving rapidly from one objective to the next. The Sherman's reliability under continuous fire proved decisive. Damaged units were repaired at forward positions and returned to action. German defensive lines, once thought unbreachable, were compromised. Commanders struggled to maintain cohesion, and communication breakdowns compounded losses. Field reports describe a growing sense of inevitability among German troops. The Shermans advanced not only physically but psychologically, eroding confidence with each maneuver. By evening, Allied forces had secured multiple key positions along the Gustav Line. Casualties were significant on both sides. Yet the strategic outcome was clear. Sherman-driven advances had disrupted German defensive cohesion, created opportunities for further penetration, and forced the Wehrmacht into a reactive posture. The combination of tactical flexibility, technological reliability, and coordinated leadership had transformed the battlefield. This climax illustrated the paradox that defined the Shermans' wartime legacy. Individually, it was outclassed by heavier German tanks in direct confrontation. Collectively, however, its integration into combined arms operations, logistical efficiency, and adaptability produced results that exceeded expectations. German forces captured tens of thousands of these vehicles in subsequent operations, yet could neither repair, deploy, nor coordinate them effectively. The weapon, deemed impossible by German intelligence, had altered the calculus of armored warfare through doctrine and systemic advantage rather than raw superiority. The battle concluded with the Americans holding the initiative, German defenses fractured, and the Sherman recognized as a decisive instrument of momentum. The stage was set for the aftermath, evaluation of captured vehicles, strategic shifts, and the broader implications for armored warfare in Europe. The consequences of this engagement extended far beyond the immediate battlefield, shaping decisions, morale, and military engineering for months to follow. By early April 1944, the consequences of the Sherman-led offensives in the Liri Valley and along the Gustav Line were fully apparent. American forces had breached key defensive positions, forcing German units into retreat and abandoning equipment that would soon fall into Allied and, paradoxically, German hands. Field reports indicated that tens of thousands of Shermans were captured in scattered engagements across Italy, North Africa, and later in France. The scale was staggering, yet the operational reality rendered most of these vehicles unusable by German forces. The Wehrmacht faced a logistical and training bottleneck. German crews were trained for domestic tanks with compatible ammunition, spare parts, and maintenance protocols. Shermans, designed around American production standards, required different fuels, guns, and repair procedures. Intelligence reports confirm that even when captured in operational condition, many tanks remained in depots, stripped for parts, or abandoned in the field. The irony was unmistakable. A weapon they labeled impossible sat in their possession, yet its potential impact was nullified by systemic constraints. Allied forces, meanwhile, consolidated territorial gains. The Shermans' mobility allowed rapid redeployment to exploit weakened sectors. Infantry units, now supported by reliable armored units, advanced into previously fortified areas, further eroding German defensive cohesion. Casualty figures reflected the intensity of engagements. Thousands of German soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured, while American losses were mitigated by effective combined arms operations and the Shermans' protective capacity. Strategically, the capture and discard of Shermans by the Germans highlighted a recurring pattern of mismanagement. Reports from German military archives detail repeated attempts to integrate captured vehicles, often resulting in mechanical failure or logistical bottlenecks. The tank's mechanical reliability, a defining advantage in Allied hands, could not be replicated within the German system. Commanders concluded that the effort required to operationalize captured Shermans exceeded any tactical benefit, leading to mass abandonment or scrapping. The psychological dimension of these events was equally significant. German soldiers confronted the Sherman on the battlefield with a mix of apprehension and frustration. Reports describe units forced into withdrawal despite superior terrain or fortified positions, undermining morale. The knowledge that tens of thousands of functional tanks sat unused within reach compounded a sense of futility. For American troops, the opposite effect occurred. Confidence in the Sherman reinforced doctrine and encouraged aggressive, coordinated maneuvers that further accelerated German retreats. The aftermath of these engagements also influenced armored warfare doctrine. Allied planners observed that the Shermans' effectiveness derived less from individual superiority and more from systematic integration. Reliable tanks, trained crews, logistical support, and combined arms coordination. German commanders, in contrast, confronted the limitations of technological acquisition without systemic alignment. The captured Shermans became a symbol of this imbalance, a weapon whose operational power depended on infrastructure, training and doctrine, not merely the mechanical design. These outcomes extended beyond immediate military considerations. The presence of captured Shermans in German depots became an unintended intelligence resource. Technical officers analyzed armor, armaments, and mechanical systems, producing reports that informed future tank designs. Yet these insights were mitigated by the inability to implement them under wartime conditions. Operational misalignment rendered knowledge largely theoretical, while the battlefield continued to be shaped by American mobility, coordination, and the relentless forward pressure of Sherman-driven offensives. The consequences in Italy presaged similar patterns elsewhere in Europe. As the Allies advanced through France after D-Day, the combination of mass-produced Shermans, flexible doctrine, and effective logistics repeatedly overwhelmed German defensive positions. Captured Shermans multiplied the irony. Germany possessed the tools for counter-offensives, yet could not operationalize them. The stage was now set for a broader reflection on the strategic, operational, and human implications of these events. By May 1944, the cumulative impact of Sherman operations was undeniable. German forces had retreated to successive defensive lines across Italy, abandoning tens of thousands of captured Shermans along the way. These vehicles, often in working condition, highlighted the dissonance between technological acquisition and operational capability. German archives confirm that even well-preserved Shermans could not be mobilized due to incompatible ammunition, fuel types, and the lack of trained crews. Entire depots of captured tanks became static monuments to a logistical failure that undermined both morale and strategic flexibility. Allied reports detailed the operational advantages gained from Sherman deployment. Units that had previously stalled in fortified sectors advanced rapidly, exploiting terrain and gaps in German defenses. The Sherman's reliability under continuous combat conditions allowed commanders to maintain offensive momentum, rotate damaged vehicles, and sustain pressure without pause. Infantry coordination ensured that each advance minimized exposure to anti-tank fire while maximizing suppression of enemy positions. In multiple documented cases, the Sherman's mobility turned seemingly impassable ridges and river crossings into viable routes for offensive action. The human cost was substantial. German units, frequently outmaneuvered and outnumbered, faced high casualties and the psychological strain of retreating under armored assault. American crews, while benefiting from the Sherman's protective design, experienced the stresses of continuous combat, mechanical maintenance under fire, and exposure to counterattacks from more heavily armored German vehicles. Diaries and after-action reports illustrate a dual reality. The Sherman protected lives while simultaneously placing crews in high-intensity engagements that demanded constant alertness and coordinated action. Strategically, the aftermath revealed the Sherman's role not only as a weapon, but as a force multiplier. German planners acknowledged its effectiveness in intelligence reports, yet the inability to convert captured Shermans into a usable fighting force highlighted a systemic deficiency. The paradox was clear: a weapon deemed impossible and captured en masse remained largely irrelevant in enemy hands, while in Allied hands it dictated battlefield dynamics, dictated tempo, and reshaped strategic decisions. The broader implications extended beyond Italy. As the Allies advanced into France and later Germany, similar patterns emerged. Captured Shermans were catalogued, inspected, and in rare cases deployed experimentally, but systemic incompatibilities persisted. The lesson crystallized: technological superiority alone does not guarantee operational advantage. Doctrine, logistics, human training, and maintenance infrastructure are equally critical. The Germans' inability to operationalize captured Shermans underscored the strategic importance of these supporting systems. In operational hindsight, the Sherman's impact was cumulative. Its reliability enabled rapid advances, minimized attrition in combined arms operations, and allowed continuous pressure against German defenses. Captured vehicles, while symbolically significant, highlighted the contrast between American systemic efficiency and German logistical fragmentation. The aftermath of these engagements underscored a principle that would resonate in post-war military theory: integration of technology with operational doctrine is decisive. while isolated technological gains can be strategically inert. The battlefield, now quieted, littered with abandoned Shermans and damaged German equipment, left an enduring testament. It was a silent acknowledgement of the weapon's effectiveness and of the mismanagement that prevented its full exploitation by the enemy. From the ruins of trenches, the echoes of tactical mastery, human resilience, and operational foresight persisted, linking the campaign's climax to the philosophical questions of warfare, strategy, and technology. The story of the Sherman in World War II is not one of individual heroism alone, but of systemic orchestration. Its significance lies not in singular confrontations, but in the coordination of human, mechanical, and logistical elements that amplified its battlefield effect. The impossible tank, captured in vast numbers by Germany yet discarded, reveals the stark reality of warfare. Technology divorced from infrastructure, training, and doctrine is powerless. For the Allies, the Sherman exemplified operational foresight. Mass production ensured availability, reliability allowed sustained engagement, combined arms doctrine transformed mobility into momentum. Each crew, each engine repaired in the field, contributed to a networked efficiency that the Germans could observe, respect, and yet could not replicate. The tank's presence reshaped decisions, dictated tempo, and forced adversaries into reactive postures that magnified its strategic effect beyond mere armor and armament. The German experience underscores a counterpoint. Possessing technology without the means to operationalize it exposes systemic fragility. Tens of thousands of Shermans, sitting idle or scrapped, became symbols of strategic misalignment. The paradox, possessing the very instrument of battlefield dominance and failing to use it, demonstrates that mastery of warfare requires more than superior machinery. It demands integration, foresight, and adaptability. Historically, the Sherman's legacy influenced armored doctrine for decades. Military theorists would study its reliability, logistical simplicity, and operational integration as a model of effective mechanized warfare. Conversely, the German inability to exploit captured Shermans offered lessons in the limits of technological obsession, absent systemic preparation. Ultimately, the narrative of these tanks transcends the mechanics of combat. It illuminates the interplay of human decision-making, technological design, and logistical foresight. It exposes the fragile line between potential and actualized capability. In the fields of Italy, in the depots where captured Shermans rested unused, the war silently demonstrated that supremacy is earned not by possession, but by the capacity to act with precision, coordination, and sustained purpose. The Sherman's journey, from mass-produced American engine of advance to impossible adversary to abandoned trophies, embodied the complex calculus of modern warfare, where doctrine, human skill, and systemic cohesion outweigh individual firepower. It reshaped the battlefield and left a legacy in military history that endures far beyond its metal and guns.